Well, by now you've probably heard we have a new 400,000 square foot furniture store, and maybe you've heard we have a $6 billion square moving in next door. And those are just two examples of what seems like a development boom in the central corridor of St. Louis, from hospitals to higher ed, from apartments to the Arch grounds. But is this boom leaving some behind? Tonight, what can we measure by the number of construction cranes popping up over parts of St. Louis? Stay tuned. Stay Tuned brings together local experts, journalists, civic leaders, and regular people to have tough conversations for a stronger St. Louis. Add your voice to our conversation, and you're at the table as we stay on top of current events and go deeper, bringing more light and less heat to the issues that matter. From the 9 network of public media in Grand Center, this is Stay Tuned. If a person was new to St. Louis, they might not know that these are relatively new to town too, or at least their return is recent. The central corridor of STL looks to be in a construction boom. Many of the new high-rises are thanks to healthcare. Hospitals and universities are expanding and even relocating to the city's Central West End, a neighborhood named one of the 10 best in the country just last October by the American Planning Association. The uptick isn't confined to the CWE. It stretches from downtown to Clayton. The Arch grounds are undergoing a redevelopment, and there are plans for a possible new stadium. Grand Center's resurgence continues, and IKEA just opened for business. A decade or more in the making, the Cortex district now seems like an overnight success, with a new look and new companies calling it home. And some would say the momentum carries over to the Del Mar Loop, where trolley construction is on track to connect the neighborhood to Forest Park. And it's not just businesses that are building. While as a region we have long been concerned with a population decline, the Central Corridor zip codes have increased by 60,000 people, or 10%, from 2000 to 2010. And that means new residential high-rises are going up, along with a whole new place to buy food. But not everyone calls this progress. Gentrification, as it's often called, can lead to higher rents and higher home values, pushing some out and threatening diversity. Some argue the tide raising these towers isn't lifting living standards for all. Despite its national ranking as a great street, Del Mar still serves as a divide. And even with all this activity, in a recent survey, St. Louis still ranked 490th out of 515 cities when it comes to growth and the economy. So starting us off tonight is the executive director of the St. Louis Development Corporation. Otis Williams is with us here. Otis, thanks for being with us. I'm curious, is it a big deal that we see these construction cranes in the Central West End, or have they been gone for so long that any little bit of development seems like a big deal?
No, I think it's a big deal because of the quantity of construction that's actually it's going on there. And so with every crane comes jobs, and jobs that leads to more jobs. And so this is an exciting time.
Put it in a little bit of perspective for us. The Central West End wasn't always fancy, I guess, or at least there was a period when it wasn't.
No, but I think what we're seeing is the growth there, more density, with more things to do, with a new millennial crowd actually moving in with some of the residents there. And so it's really an exciting place to be at this time.
Are you excited by IKEA? Because I know, I can't help but think that people camped out for Krispy Kreme too, and I don't know how much of an economic indicator Krispy Kreme was, but are you excited by the excitement over IKEA?
I am. I mean, the fact that people will camp out, 2 days before, and that the parking lots are continually full, since they opened, it's exciting. It's growth for the city as far as the tax base, and so it's bring it on, as I say.
Okay, I'll give you perhaps an opportunity to brag. I don't know, is this what you're seeing in that footage we saw there and what we're talking about now? Is this a result of a strategic plan by the city, or is this the result of a nationwide trend in our economy, and this is our slice of the pie here in St. Louis?
No, I think this is a result of having great partners here in the city. So the folks at Cortex, the folks at WashU and Barnes Jewish, and all those folks who are working to try and build that particular part of our city, And it reflects also the other partnerships that we have in the city. Folks who are working in the arch grounds, folks working north and south. And so we have great partners here in the city who are trying to make improvements.
Are we doing much north and south?
Well, the energy that we have in the Central Corridor, we hope will transform and move slowly to the north and south. And so recently we did a market value analysis, and one of the recommendations that came from that was basically to not scatter your efforts, but to essentially use the strength that you have and sort of move, if you will, gradually away from your strength.
So how are you able to, are we able, and if so, how will we duplicate what we've seen in the Central Corridor?
Well, we can, as I indicated, I think part of the strength there was building off of the relationships that we had engendered there, with the institutions and with the neighborhood organizations. And so I think we will continue to use that model. We found that obviously has generated a great outcomes here in the Central Corridor. And so we see some of the same things happening in Old North, down at Lafayette Square, Soulard, where they're good neighborhood organizations, but they also have some institutions that are working with them to try and continue the growth.
I've heard you talk about the North Riverfront and the potential that you see there with or without an NFL stadium. Is that fair? That
is fair. We're working with Great Rivers Greenway, and as you indicated, we had a plan with the stadium and a plan without a stadium. Obviously, development will move quite a bit faster with an anchor like a stadium, sort of a catalytic effort, if you will, if the stadium is there sooner. But we have plans that even if the stadium is not there to gradually try to grow that. And we'd like to be able to use a model very similar to what Cortex has been.
And does that include some sort of, you talk about the institutions in the Central Corridor, does that include an education component downtown of some kind?
Well, it very well could be, and actually we would like to have some of the institutions that are here to share some of their programs with us, all over the city as we try and build some of those.
Do you ever worry that some of this success prices people out, pushes people out of their own neighborhood?
Well, I think we've taken great pain to try and ensure that we don't push people out, that we have affordable homes and housing available, and that each of our developments that are occurring, that there is a affordable component to that.
Otis, thank you very much. Stay with us if you would. We're going to join a larger panel that we're excited to talk to, but also we want to talk about what we've heard from you every week, Tuesday night, with hashtag StayTunedSTL. We have a Twitter chat, and we try to have this show informed by that chat. Here for a breakdown of what we learned this week is Maya Northfleet.
On Tuesday night's Stay Tuned Twitter chat, we discussed the impact of new developments around the Central Corridor. This isn't the first time we've talked development around the St. Louis region. The Central Corridor has been garnering attention for quite some time now. Lou Marley shared his general feelings saying, "I love development and job creation. I'm opposed to TIF and eminent domain. If the Central Corridor just becomes a younger version of Ladue with older buildings, I'm not interested. But if we can get job creation and housing for working families and better schools for kids, I'm with it." When the topic turned to IKEA St. Louis's grand opening, all the tweeters agreed that IKEA brings the city a different appeal. Raymond Chandler tweeted, "It's a good draw to the city on any given weekend other than an actual event like a festival, concert, or game." St. Louis Social Group said, "IKEA St. Louis is a great addition to the city. Renovation, jobs, and Swedish meatballs, what's not to like?" In previous chats, we've talked about how there are many areas that need development, but it feels like most developments are located in the Central Corridor. Casey Hinton has an idea on how to change that. She suggests leverage TIF money. If a developer wants TIF money for something in the Central Corridor, then they must do something somewhere else in an underserved part of the area. And when we talk development, concerns of gentrification comes up. The Central Corridor is developing nicely, but what about the surrounding communities that have long been there? How can areas benefit without community members being pushed out? Casey Hinton feels that ship has sailed. Where Dean Obermark feels that measuring and preventing gentrification ought to be part of the planning process. Want to be a part of our next chat? Follow us on Twitter at StayTunedSTL and follow the conversation on Tuesday nights at 8 p.m. with the hashtag StayTunedSTL.
Okay. Joining Otis and me, here we have three more panelists I'd like to introduce. Dennis Lauer, President and CEO of Cortex, which we say now and assume everyone knows, perhaps because of its success, but this is along Forest Park Parkway.
No, it's because of IKEA.
Because of IKEA, that is part of the Cortex footprint there. Also with us, Hank Weber, Executive Vice Chancellor and Professor of Practice, Washington University in St. Louis, and back to the show is Michael Allen, Director of the Preservation Research Office. And I want to get to all of you and talk about, if the Central Corridor is a success, how can we replicate it, duplicate it? But I want to first pick up right on what we just heard from our Twitter chat right there. If you're living in North City, South City, North County, South County, what we're talking about here, this Central Corridor may be completely irrelevant. Have we neglected other parts of our region while focusing on our more affluent core?
Well, first of all, it's not like the Central Corridor doesn't matter to everybody in the region. First of all, it's a huge source of jobs. So Cortex now has 3,600 jobs, or the BJC WashU complex has 30,000 jobs. Those are jobs that go to people from all over the region. When Forest Park becomes, as it's become, one of the great urban parks of the world, that benefits everybody. So it is true that we've made more progress on redevelopment along the Central Corridor than we have north in particular. I don't think you can say that the improvements in the Central Corridor, the growth of jobs, of amenities, of places to shop, of places to recreate, doesn't have a benefit that goes well beyond, that goes to the whole city and beyond the city.
And I would say that, St. Louis is really good at spreading out. So any force that creates density is something good and counters a lot of our trends. So while I would like to see what happens in the Central Corridor happening everywhere, the fact that it's concentrated is a net regional benefit, I think. The other part of this, it's a debate as old as creating Forest Park back in the 1870s when Hiram Leffingwell gave that land to the city, and the aldermen in the north and the south side complained and got their own parks. What happened there, though, was the city gave spoils in the form of infrastructure, and I think that's what's really maybe the crucial sort of balancing act. The Central Corridor is blessed with institutional and transportation infrastructure. If there's an equity gap, it's not answered by trying to put IKEA in North St. Louis. It's by extending light rail, the North-South Metrolink line, and creating those anchor assets that really generate other economic activity.
I see a lot of heads nodding around the table.
Yeah. I think that's a very solid point. We often talk about the corridor as being a spine, and spines have ribs, and the neighborhoods are the ribs. Speaking for Cortex as an innovation community, historically, science parks and innovation communities, 40% of the jobs go to high school graduates and associate degree or technician level folks. And I think when you look at BJC and you look at WashU, those institutions, it's a whole continuum of jobs. So, if you look at the development of cities over the last 100 years, during the industrial period up to the 1950s, the factories were in the city, and the neighborhoods were the workforce that supplied those factories. And most people walked because they didn't have cars, and the shopping was done in the neighborhoods. And then post-1950 to almost 2000, that movement out to the suburbs took factories out and took people out and stranded folks. What's happening now, I think, with the commitment and doubling down of WashU and BJC and others in the Central Corridors, like Cortex, is to bring those jobs back. We are the factories today. It's not smokestack, it's knowledge-based factories. And we need to connect, and I would agree 100%, that we need to be looking for creative solutions of connecting transportation corridors down into where these jobs are, because density is an absolute requirement for innovation communities.
And that's essentially what we're trying to do now. In fact, I just hired a new person to focus on just the corridors that will link us. And so our focus is to try to do exactly what Dennis described, which is to link our corridors, get people to where the jobs are, or to be able to provide services at various nodes until we are more dense in some of the areas. But yes, we need to be able to link to where the jobs are.
Something else that came up in the Twitter chat was the use of TIFs. Pro sports teams don't build stadiums without public money these days, it seems like. Do developers not develop without tax breaks? Is that just the way it is, or is that changing? Does it need to change?
Well, more often it is the way it is because of the competitive nature of various jurisdictions and geographies. And so if you're vying for a national or a global client, there's some expectation that there will be some public support. And so, you know, there are times when the client or the business will come on its own, but more often you will need to incentivize their presence.
Is it? I'd heard that the standard, one of the large apartment buildings that was built just across from IKEA, did not take a TIF or did not.
That's correct.
That's correct.
We are actually, it is a symbol of the strengthening of the Central Corridor. If you look, we are starting to see projects happen with either very little or no TIF assistance.
Right.
For a long period of time, the unfortunate reality is St. Louis couldn't attract development without considerable TIF assistance. As the market's strengthening, that's really changing, and that's a very good thing.
And we're starting to look very closely at the percentage that we're providing. So, you know, as Hank indicates, we at one point it was no way to do any deal, but as we are looking at each of the developments, we are scrutinizing them to ensure that we don't over-incentivize.
Sticking with the apartment complex as an example, not that one particular necessarily, but we've heard from some grad students or some recent grads that said, my gosh, I could never afford any of these rates in any of these new buildings that have gone up. Are there people that, are there people left out of this vision?
I think there are different price points in the market right now. So surrounding Cortex, both north and south, are a whole variety and continuum of ranges of costs. Yes, with success, market rates rise. There's no question about that. Historically, it's been the case in this country. We have to find ways, though, to ensure that we have a diverse and inclusive participation in the Central Corridor in many ways. We all have different levels of income. We all have different opportunities to live nearby, in close, or far out. The issue from my perspective of subsidies is that in a market that is robust, you don't need subsidies. In a market, I mean, the market tells you if it's robust or not. And what tells you is a developer who's willing to put his or her money on the table, unsubsidized, and do a project. And that is based on the value proposition of the region. And quite frankly, the value proposition as an outsider coming in 5 years ago, when I look at the city, the value proposition of the city is still not sold to the rest of the region. When people come into the city, it's for specific events, or whether they be cultural or sports, and now they're coming in for shopping, you know, at IKEA. But we have to improve the value proposition of the city so that people are moving back to live here, so that companies that migrated 10, 15, 20 years ago are coming back in. That's what changes the value proposition of the city. And millennials are a big part now of changing that value proposition, because these companies that moved out now are looking at moving back in across the country in order to compete for that talent.
I'd like to address the point about price points. As cities become more economically successful, housing prices increase. We think of the places with the lowest unemployment rate and the least need to subsidize development are places like New York and San Francisco, which are very expensive. What that means is the job of the public sector and the job of all of us who care about balanced development shifts more from the growth side, from using incentives to induce development, and more toward the affordability side. And I would think, I have tremendous hopes that that's where focus of our public policy is over the next 5 to 10 years. But that means continued growth. We are still, let us remember, among the most affordable at the current time of the 20 largest cities in the country.
Right, and I think that our biggest sort of source of affordable housing is our abundant historic housing stock. We're not going to win the battle on affordable housing with new buildings like the Standard, because the construction price points, I mean, most affordable housing is always existing housing. And just to get to what Hank said, I think there are issues of policy that really relate to affordability around the core. For instance, in the Shaw neighborhood, where, you know, tax abatements have definitely ratcheted down, but for a while we're in that higher end The number of Section 8 vouchers being used has plummeted from over 400 down to 100. And that's a close-in historic neighborhood that's enjoyed a diversity. I think being more mindful of the impact of subsidy on restricting and public housing that's proximate to this job growth is something to look at. And again, tying back to infrastructure. You know, not everyone has to live across the street from Cortex to work there, but if it takes them an hour to get to work, it's harder for a working family.
Speaking of Cortex, what did you learn? What have we learned and that might be duplicated, might be used on the North River front? What's new in your toolbox that you didn't have before this experience of leading the development in the Central West End there in Cortex?
Well, you know, there's so many lessons, so many ways to cut this and dissect it and look at it. But what I think we've learned over the last, we've been in existence for 13 years. We've tried some
Which is
things.
longer than most people might think.
Right.
A lot of people know IKEA, and maybe they might know Square, and they might know
4240, and they might think,
4240,
oh, look
right.
at all this. Overnight success.
Right.
But that overnight success came with long planning over the last decade and a half and committed partners. And I think that part of the early vision of Cortex was that if you build it, they'll come. We got some traction with that, but in fact, technology companies don't just pick up and move. And so we've pivoted, and now we're focused on startup companies and growing our own, because everybody around the world wants to attract an established, well-heeled company. It's the most competitive arena for economic development in the world today. So we've pivoted in the last 5 years to focusing on growing our own companies. And when you grow your own companies, you're dealing with a younger clientele, you're dealing with a workforce, increasingly millennial, who is looking for living environments that are live, work, play, learn all together in a compact area. So one of the things we've learned is the importance of amenities within the district. It's about the spaces and places where people collide with each other in a serendipitous fashion. So we are making sure that we have all of those amenity elements to attract the current workforce. When it comes down to it, we are competing for talent, workforce talent. We're competing for companies in a very competitive environment. Every major city and even minor cities, second-tier and third-tier cities, are looking for the same kind of people that we are. So that's one of the things in the last 5 years we've learned, to create environments that draw people, that add to that value proposition I talked about.
I've been the vice chair of the Cortex board and been deeply involved since I came 7.5 years ago. In addition to what Dennis said, 2 quick points. Density really matters. Mm-hmm. It really matters that people are in close proximity and they collide with each other and they interact. And I think a lot of the story of the Central West End you mentioned, it's a very dense neighborhood. It has beautiful single-family homes, but it has a lot more apartment buildings.
I thought Americans liked their own individual castle.
I think that we are clearly, every city in the country is experiencing a change in taste, particularly among young people, particularly among millennials, but also among a group of older people, many of them post-children who are moving back. We're seeing growth in a lot of America's densest cities. People want to be in places that are amenity-rich, that are highly walkable. And I think that's the other thing we've learned is you need a lot of partners and you need to stick with these things for a long time. Because as you note, Cortex got off, it was a slow start, but it's been a glorious last few years.
We just have a couple of minutes left. I want to go around the table and briefly give me your prediction. Look into your crystal ball for the next year or otherwise. NFL, NGA, this time, if we met again this time next year?
Well, I hope if we meet at this time next year that we have secured the NGA and that we have an NFL team. I think for the north edge of downtown north, it would do great things as we move that way to try and have the anchor of the stadium, the anchor of the NGA, and the choice neighborhood planning that is underway. We have the choice neighborhood grant in place as well to try and work some of the issues that are related to the housing there.
Dennis, next year, 365 days in St. Louis will be different how?
From where I sit, geographically, continued investment in the Midtown and Central West End areas. We'll have more new announcements. of some victories, and we're going to have some good celebrations that St. Louisans can feel proud of.
Hank?
We're going to see continued major investment, continued growth of density in this area, and I think we'll start to see public policy shifting and starting to move toward greater consideration of some of these affordability issues.
Michael, your predictions for the next year, if we had you back here this time next year?
I think all the successful density, attractive density coming out of the Central Corridor will force a discussion on the city's zoning code. I think we'll be talking more seriously about a form-based code to enhance the investments we've been talking about tonight, especially around there. We're going to be sick of looking at quick trips popping up like the plague. And I don't think we're going to get a football stadium on the North River front. I think we're going to be talking about an alternative that may look a lot more like Cortex.
And is one better than the other? Are you disappointed if we don't have a football team?
So I believe that the hand that you're dealt, and when you play it, that you make the best of it. And I think that can we survive without a football team? Yes. Will it challenge us to find new ways to expand and to double down? Yes. But I'm a believer that that good people working together, strong partners, always produce positive results.
You know, the deal is that we plan for either getting the football team or not. And so as we started off our conversation, we have a plan for with the stadium and one without. So I see us being able to tackle the North River front.
I like
either
it.
way.
That's a football pun. We'll end on that. Otis, Dennis, Hank, and Michael, thank you all for your time. Thank you. Until next week, stay tuned.